Hi, this is Andy calling from Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised. And I'm here with Chris Pomeroy, and we had so much fun interviewing Adam Kane for our Joiners Table podcast that we have decided to start another movie chat podcast with Adam Kane. So, hope you enjoy. So, let's talk about films that broke barriers, like
Okay.
effects and stuff. Do you have any films that you know that just really pushed? I mean, obviously, it seems like major effects studios started with a big franchise type movie. ILM started with Star Wars. Digital Domain started with Terminator. Weta was Lord of the Rings. So it feels like big studios really sort of start with a big franchise in a sense. Are there any films that you feel like really pushed the genre? I mean, obviously those franchises kind of did because of
For
the
for
studio.
me, it would be The Matrix with the bullet time and all that kind of stuff they did.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Yeah,
But for me, something like Memento was pretty cool in the way that they told the
Yeah,
story and it started
that was cool.
unfolding for the first time in a weird way.
That
Almost like
was cool.
logical, as opposed to using visual
Effects.
effects to aid in storytelling. But for me, after Star Wars, it was Blade Runner.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
Blade
it
Runner was big.
was such an insane marriage between traditional matte painting, like glass matte painting, and and studio photography to create a world that I mean, maybe 2001 was the last version of that, but that was in space. And so there was some touchstone for that. Blade Runner was a world that nobody had ever imagined. It
Right.
was, it was like Star Wars in that sense.
Yeah.
Uh, so that to me was like a notable game changer in my, and then Alien was the next one where it was like, in a horror movie. Um, Again, like the combination of matte paintings and camera tricks to be able to drop you into a fantasy environment um, in a combination of techniques that was a game changer. Just totally changed the way that people thought about these things.
I felt like I liked The Thing because it used some of those old school,
So good.
armature stuff and things, which was really fun to see.
It was so good.
Yeah.
You got me thinking, Adam, with did you see the newer Blade Runner that came out? Probably about 10 years ago now.
The Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I saw it. I mean, it's good. What can I say? It's not the original.
Yeah.
Well, it also
Well,
didn't.
I think you just nailed what I'm getting at is that yeah, it's there. I mean, it's great. But I think what you said earlier is that in using storytelling, and you mentioned the psychological aspect of it, that's to me what made it, and that's what made it believable. So the effects are secondary at that point. Yeah, they're cool, and man, it's kind of amazing to look back at what they accomplished back then without all these CGI. But then in 2049, they have the CGI, and it just kind of meh.
Well, they didn't push it. They didn't push it the same. In that time period, they pushed Blade Runner pushed so much blending of different things. Whereas now it's so easy. They didn't even really push it in
Well, but
2040.
let me ask the question though. I mean, and this is one of the mantras of some of the screenwriting books you'll read out there where they say, "Don't let plot get in the way of your story." Um, Really and truthfully, I think the success of Blade Runner and actually all these movies we've talked about today, the one thing they all have in common is a strong sense of story.
Mhm.
And it goes all the way back probably to the Greek tragedies and everything else. But I almost think nowadays it's getting harder because people find more value in opening a package on YouTube than sitting through a 3 hour movie watching something that's telling a story.
I think it has to do with relatability, ultimately.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always come back to with Blade Runner is, and this is what the combination of happy accident meets good intentions, is that the movie on the plot perspective, is a crime thriller.
Right.
It's a detective story.
Yeah.
Got bad people killing. You got the cop who's been pulled out of retirement, one last job, and
Right. Right.
right. Then you find out about, like, you know, the studio's notes on the movie and their problems with it, and the fact that they felt like, well, God, we need a narration, and Harrison Ford was like, no way am I doing a narration. F you. And they said it's contractual, you have to do it. And then he read this very deadpan thing, hoping to sabotage it so they wouldn't use it. But in a way, and I've seen all versions of Blade Runner because it's one of my favorite movies. I've seen the director's cut, I've seen the original theatrical cut, I've seen the studio recut, blah, blah, blah. But the one that was released theatrically with the sort of very droll, drony kind of 1940s film noir gumshoe cop
Yeah, exactly. The gumshoe. Yeah.
is unintentionally very effective because
That's funny. I never knew that about that, that he
it
didn't want to do that.
oh, he fought
Yeah.
tooth and nail until it got to the lawsuit conversations,
Wow.
and
That's
so,
funny.
but also, and the movies have different meaning, right? If you watch the version without the narration, you really do wonder, like, wow, is Deckard an android? Is he human? Like, there's a lot more questions about um uh his identity in the movie. Um, so that was one of those things where, but they both work and they're both very effective, and I like them both for different reasons. But at the heart of it, it's still about a guy who's been charged with a mission that, in a way, he knows he can't win.
Right.
Yeah.
So the circumstances, it's another underdog story, and I think those stories are very relatable to
That's
people.
like the last detail. I don't know if you ever saw that, the
Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure.
Randy
Yeah.
Quaid and all that. It's interesting you say that. And I have to ask the question though, if you had seen the version without the narration first, would it make as much sense to you? And I guess that's a question because nowadays that's all permeated within our society and it's a known, it's like,
It's a good
oh,
question.
these guys are androids, blah, blah, blah. But if you didn't know that when you first saw Blade Runner in the 80s, I mean,
I'll,
was that, what's
I'll never,
that? Go.
I'll
Sorry.
never, no, no, I'll never know. I mean, this is the thing. It's like I can't, hypothesize when I know. So
Yeah.
it's, in the version that got released theatrically with the narration, I never thought for a second really that he was an android because you're brought on a human journey through a human voice, and
Right.
you're not watching the behavior quite as carefully as you do in the version without, because you're forced to, because there is no narration. So it's kind of a different experience. It's
Yeah.
all a different cut because that was what Ridley Scott had first intended, was that you don't know if he
Right.
was an
Right.
android.
Right.
Yeah.
But then I can point to a movie on another side of the spectrum, since we're talking about these kinds of things, with Chris Nolan, called Inception,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
which has an incredibly plot-heavy, non-relatable plot to it, because nobody knows what it's like to be able to transform time and space, and obviously Nolan has obsessions with the subject matter, which is cool. And he tried to bury a very, very human story at the heart of it about loss and grief.
Mhm.
But for me, it never penetrated through the surface of the artifice of the plot and the design of the world. And that's okay because I still like Inception. I like it
Yeah.
a lot. It's cool. It's entertaining. I get caught up in sort of the mishigas behind the technology as they imagined it, and like how they go under, and the dangers of, the parameters of when they won't be able to come back and things like that. But I never really get fully on board with DiCaprio's grief.
Right.
Whereas in Blade,
Interesting.
I'm personally completely on board with this guy who's up against a system he can't change. Like, that's very relatable in the same way that in Memento, just to play counter argument with Nolan,
Yeah,
I'm really on board with Guy Pearce
yeah,
throughout that movie,
yeah, yeah,
about his emotional kernel. And I think part of that is because they didn't have a gazillion dollars to spend on
Mhm.
an FX world that would become so primary to the core of the movie in the way it is in Inception.
well,
To rely
sometimes
on his acting.
I
Yeah,
feel like
he's
I feel like sometimes they go a little too far into the effects and not too much, not enough into the story, like you're saying, and then the effects become cool, glitzy, and interesting, but not it. Then it's about the houses that did the effects, not about the
Mhm.
movie. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In a sense.
I
Well,
mean,
Um,
and those are always dated too. That's the funny thing. You go back and watch Terminator, and the effects, I mean, in some cases they're almost laughable. I mean, you put that up against the soundtrack from the time too, and it's like, wow, this movie is dated, you know. All these sounds going, meh, 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 you know, and it's just like it doesn't. I don't think it stands the test of time. I think the story does, but I think the effects are they're kind of a byproduct that have been surpassed.
But I also feel like that's what's cool about some of those older films because they really do show the evolution of technology and the evolution of
Yeah.
effects houses and how they all changed. I mean, you watch some of the old Rick Baker stuff, and man, it's pretty cool, you know?
Well, yeah, you get into it with like I think it was Terminator 3 when the cop turned into molten metal or whatever. And
Yeah,
that got pretty cool. Like,
pretty cool. I mean, but I still love Star Wars.
yeah.
yeah,
I like the little models going through the Death Star, and
Yeah.
I prefer that for my own sensibility. Like I think that feels better
yeah.
as effect as opposed to a completely digital image. But that's me.
Yeah.
That's my taste.
It does. I feel like it does make a difference, and sometimes you don't even. You might the difference is so small, but for some reason you like it more. You know what I mean? There are those things, and I think when you're making films and making stories, you need to kind of pull some of that into it. And I
I
feel
think we
like
could have a 4 hour conversation on what you just tapped into, Andy. And I think we're going to see exactly that now that AI is really becoming prevalent. I believe that, to put it simply, it's the flaw in the diamond that gives it value. And
Mhm.
I think we're getting to that point where AI is just about to cross that uncanny valley, and people are not going to be able to tell the difference, but they will. And what that difference is the human piece that goes into it. And
right.
you know that a machine cannot replicate an accident in nature, and it can't replicate what Adam's eye sees when he's trying to frame something.
Well, Orson Welles always talked about his whole film, everything was all about capturing the happy accidents. It wasn't
Yeah,
about, oh, I'm so great, I know all this stuff. It was like he just managed to roll film and caught really cool stuff. And it was really about putting it all together in a way. So for
yeah.
him, it was about, everybody was saying, oh, Orson, you're so great. And for him, it was more like, I have an idea and I have a vision and I don't know what I'm going to get, but I capture all the stuff and it's the accidents that are always the best, and I feel like in a lot of filmmaking it is kind of that, that it's a group. You have a whole crew of people that you're around. I mean, Adam, you can speak to that, and I feel like that's one of the things too sometimes where the big studios tend to destroy the magic that started that person's career gets destroyed because now you have to use this whole big industry thing as opposed to these cool guys that were working together with great ideas and they're all pushing each other. The lighting, the cinematographer, they're all working together. And I saw that in Gus Van Sant because he's right down the street. So I saw that in Drugstore Cowboy and To Die For and Idaho and all that stuff. But you could go to Good Will Hunting, which is a great film. It's very Hollywood, and he's
Well,
always trying to go back.
if you wanted to cross genres for an analogy, there's a reason people all love Weezer's first album and can't name the second one till today. You know, it's they had this brilliance and they had all this stuff that their life experience led up to at that point in time, and they released it, and then the record company said, "I want five more just like that."
Right, right.
I mean, there is a commercial reality as you're
Yes, that's
suggesting.
true.
And those of us that, work in the commercial arts, as I call it,
Yeah.
um, we're dealing with other people's money. And so you have to figure out where you are in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
If you were, if you're more of an auteur like Nolan, then you're going to make the movie you want. And the studio understands that. The financiers understand that.
Well, the Coen
If
brothers kind of have always been in that category,
they've
hopefully.
John Cassavetes was always in that
Yeah. Yeah.
category. John Sayles was always in that category. Like there's a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
Warren Beatty, when he made movies as a director, he was like that as well.
Yeah.
But for the vast majority of us who are don't enjoy that auteur kind of brand,
Uh-huh.
Danny Boyle, by the way, another one, great
Yeah.
filmmaker. Um, there's a responsibility that I always feel to the paycheck that's being given to me because I would not be making art if I wasn't being paid to do it by somebody else.
Right.
It's my money. So I
Right.
have to take into account what they want. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's just a matter of like knowing your audience. What is the show you're on? If I'm doing an Aaron Spelling show, my job is to not make a Cassavetes movie. If I'm on 90210, I'm not going to be making sophisticated story.
Right.
I'm just not.
Right.
Right.
That and that's part of like what artists struggle with in these industries is that they are trying to like elevate something artificially because of their own beliefs as opposed to working within the system that they're in. Um, that's the way I see it. That's what I've seen in my career.
It feels to me from my lifetime as a kid when we're talking about going to the Isis Theater and all that stuff to now, I feel like the studios have gotten more business, whereas there was a little bit more risk back in the day and people had a little bit more room to do stuff. And someone like Paul Newman could say, no, I want this. And they could actually do get that. Whereas now it's a lot harder to do that. You know what I mean? And the studios have their algorithms and their setups, and so they say, this is what we need. And so
I guess you'd have to differentiate though. Are we talking about movies or TV in that regard?
I'm talking about the industry as a whole seems to be a little bit more controlled as opposed to before, where it was trying to find the happy accidents and foster sort of new talent and bring up stuff. Whereas now it's sort of like trying to put folks into a box a little bit.
The franchise, et
Yeah,
cetera,
I
et
mean,
cetera.
Adam, how do you feel about that? I mean, it is commercial, so yes, we are working for people, and it is business.
A topic that could occupy 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there's a long history of how we got here
Mhm.
that we could touch on, but in 30 seconds or less, the movies were a contract system in the up until the late 1960s, new wave of filmmakers in the 1970s with people like Coppola and Spielberg and Robert Evans running Paramount with a whole sort of, clashing against corporations who were starting to buy studios that were being put up for sale by people like Jack Warner that had been
Right.
family businesses for decades. And the sad reality as it exists today is from that lineage, you have corporations that all own the major studios, and that amount of their portfolio is about that big.
So the mergers and acquisitions, basically.
Yeah, so in the end, there has been a long debate going on inside those corporations on whether having entertainment studios is even worth it.
Right.
Because they don't make even a fraction of the profit in those companies.
Right.
So they're good PR, they're good public relations, they're good for lots of other reasons, which is why they've stuck around.
Uh-huh.
But the reason why that things have become so much more, or at least appeared to be less creatively friendly, let's say, is you just have to follow the money in the end, which is the same for all things in life, in my opinion.
Right.
In a capitalistic society, people follow the money. If you believe Chris Nolan or Denis Villeneuve is going to go make a movie that's going to make you money, then you let them make the movie that they make because that's what they demand.
Right.
Same thing with Scorsese or with Spielberg, right?
Or even
But
Tarantino. I mean, he's got a market, and everything he does is on that market level.
he's had to fight for that. He's
Yeah.
had to threaten people and say, I'm going to hang up the phone in 10 seconds unless you agree to the terms of how I'm going to make this movie. And there's a very famous story about him counting down on a phone call with a particular executive about the movie he wanted to make. So, like, the people have to stand their ground to get what they want, but they also have to have some cards in their hand. You know, you can't be anybody and make that threat.
Right.
That's career suicide,
Right.
right? So for the rest of us, it's all about how do we disguise really cool content within a commercial landscape so
Right.
that they make the money that they're looking for, and we can put out the messaging that we want to put out in the movies. Because the most important movies to me are movies like The Killing Fields. They're
Right.
movies that have a political message, that are social commentary. Those are the movies that I like the most, as you know, personally. But in today's market, if you can imagine, this won't be that hard to imagine for anyone, I think, but you have the business, the movie business is a TV business. Entertainment's being run by a slew of middle management.
Right.
Those middle managers have to upsell to their bosses,
Right.
and they don't want to lose their jobs.
Right. Everybody's neck's on the line in a sense. Yeah.
So if they're not going to lose their parking spaces, they can't greenlight something that's too risky in the portfolio, because they know that their bosses are going to have to answer in the quarterly stock report to the
Right.
board, Gulf Plus Western, or whatever oil company owns a studio, because that's the
Right.
reality. So there has been a general atrophy where it's better to not greenlight anything, and then people can keep their jobs as executives in the studio and only greenlight the things that make sense. A Marvel movie,
Right.
because who would greenlight a Marvel movie at this stage? There's a TV show called The Agency, which has Richard Gere, Jeffrey Wright, and Michael Fassbender. Who would not greenlight that show? You can't, if it tanked, you can't blame the executive. So it's all about a culture of fear, in due respect to making money on the quarter sheets. It just is.
So
Hmm.
how did stuff like Breaking Bad come in, or Stranger Things? Because I mean, I mean, Netflix was nothing until Stranger Things came in, and then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, these guys could create some cool stuff. Do you know what I mean? It kind of opened the door, but again, it was a risk on some folks that pitched to every network that said no, and then they said, well, okay, we'll fund it, and all of a
So
sudden it was a big hit.
Breaking Bad was right place, right time, because AMC was a completely new network. They
Hmm.
didn't have a brand. They were trying to figure out who they were, and they took a swing.
Yeah,
And that's what all new entities do at the beginning. They take swings to see what sticks.
right,
They got lucky. They got lucky that Breaking Bad turned into a cultural phenomenon, you
right,
know?
yeah,
And with
Yeah, I think you're right. It's the same as the Beatles got turned down by how many record companies before, I mean, same thing,
Led
It's
Zeppelin was
almost
to the US. They did a US tour because they didn't think they could make money on a UK tour. So they started opening for, for the Eagles.
yeah, yeah,
Play in Colorado, in fact, was their first show when they came to the States in 1970 or whatever it was. So, and they became a sensation here, and then they went home. And when they went home, they thought they were going to have to like start at smaller clubs, but it caught up with them. So it's all about, just follow the dollar, man. That's really
I
what.
feel like though there's something said about the spirit of the risk that the people take in the very beginning that started their company that they don't hold on to, and eventually they get sucked into the whole rat race and they lose what
Oh,
started them and what gave them the start.
I agree with you. And there are a lot of people, most of the people on the planet, in my opinion, operate out of fear.
Yeah,
That makes them risk averse because they worry and they future trip about things that haven't happened yet. And, they don't take risks.
right.
So they stay within a system where if they make certain moves, they know that they're going to be okay. And that sense of safety is more important to them. Fortunately, I have not been hampered too much by that system mechanism. I've taken a lot of risks,
Well,
but
you've had a variety. You have a range that you've worked on, which is kind of cool.
I wasn't afraid to say no to people.
Right.
So I got offered a lot of things that I thought would just keep me entrenched in a place I didn't want to be,
Hmm.
uh, creatively. And so I got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time for a number of these decisions. Like I'll give you an example. When I moved over from um, cinematography to directing, I uh, had to say no to a lot of significant projects that were offered to me because that's how people knew me. They knew me as a cinematographer. So, but I wanted to move over into directing. I thought better for me to try it now at this point in my life, which at that point was 2005. Because if I get to be 60, nobody's going to give me a break. I have to
Right.
be, because it's an ageist business. The world's
Yeah.
ageist, you know. So I did. And I basically said, no, 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 no. I had no income for 9 months, 10 months. I flew myself to different cities to follow other directors around on television sets to put in my time to show that I was serious, hoping to get hired on those kinds of shows. And in the end, it paid off. But I was probably about 3 weeks away from having to get another job as a cinematographer and kind of give up. But it took me the better part of a year digging in and saying no, 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 at potentially my at risk, because the problem is that in the entertainment business, when you switch careers, you then become competition for everybody else who you used to work for.
Right. Right.
And I knew that once I did that, there was no going back. It's
Right.
tough.
Yeah. But I also feel like if you don't take the risk, you're never going to get it. It's like
That's
it,
how I felt.
yeah,
I
it's
felt like, you know what, if I try and I fail, at least I can like go to sleep at night knowing I tried. But if I never even try, it's just going to eat away at my brain the rest of my life. And I can't, I've not been able to tolerate that.
right. Right.
So it's just a matter of like what's your pressure point. Because some people need the security of like, okay, I'm going to be on Malcolm in the Middle for 8 seasons and I'm going to go to work every day and I'm not making high art, but I'm putting my kids through college. And
Right.
there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
It's not. I was not destined to be in that world.
Right. Well, that's and funny, but I feel like that's part of Aspen too. We all kind of were taught to follow our passion, follow our dreams. What do you want to do? And it's anything is possible. And I feel like that, again, a lot of people don't grow up in that environment, and so they don't get that ability. But I've always felt like I'm always changing the frontier, chasing the frontier. Always, I was the first one in Portland to go from 2D or armature animation into the computer. It was an Amiga. It was, rough and old and rickety, but, I saw the potential. And so I jumped into it. And again, I see that the people who are pushing are the ones leading the way. And I feel like it's fun to be one of those as opposed to person who's following. It feels to me like you're more of a machine than inspiration. You know what I mean? It feels like breaking new ground is something that's a challenge and it pushes you further and further. And the more you do that, the more,
I always look at it as the birth of modern art. Going to art school, we were learning about all of the art that was really prevalent at the time in the like the 1860s, 1870s and stuff. And you go back and you look at some of these artists, so what they thought was great at the time, they being the general populace. And I mean, these names are all forgettable by today's standards. What was rememberable were the guys that were breaking the rules, the Cezannes who couldn't get into a major museum, so he started a gallery, and all the way up through Picasso and everything else. Those names are remembered now because they broke the rules and they went out of the comfort zone of what people thought was great. And I personally, I wonder what that next breakthrough is in this age of social media and me, and who are the real artists that are making those moves, and who are they going to be talking about when my grandkids go to college? What is it going to be? Is it which movies, which directors, which musicians were the ones that that didn't make any money at their time? Van Goghs and things like that. But
I kind
Great
of like
question.
I kind of like Banksy because he makes such a huge thing and not many people know who he is.
Yeah.
His artwork makes such a big impact, and
Well,
it's
but I
almost
think
like he does
visual
something and then walks away and sees what the reaction is. And I respect that kind of an artist a lot.
visual arts in terms of flat media like that, what we're talking about is are changing right now with AI. It's going to be a whole different world in 10 years. Is it going to be moving art? Is it going to be film? Is it going to be virtual reality? Well, I mean, that's where I'm curious. Where's the next breakthrough, you know?
Even with AI, though, you still have to input, you still have to prompt, you still have to, so that someone has to have something to give it started. It's like the vision and the story and all that stuff needs to exist, or someone has to have some idea in order to pull that out of AI. AI just doesn't do it automatically. I mean, yes, you can throw a script in, and yes, it can create some visuals, but you know what? It's not that it's odd and macabre and weird. In order to bring it into the structure, the system of an actual story, an actual film, a person has to be able to kind of force it to do that. You know what I mean? At least that's the
Yeah,
experience I've got.
I don't think that you're wrong there, but what I'm getting at is that 2 years ago, a background artist in animation, it might take a week or a month to do a background for a single scene, a single pan shot.
Right.
And now you can prompt an AI, and you and I have played with it.
Yeah.
You get 17 of them back in 5 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
They may not be perfect, but you can tweak them and get them there in an hour.
Right.
So I think that world is changing now, and I'm sure the same is true for cinema, for movie, and for TV both.
It is, and that's what the big labor fights were about last year. Were
Yeah,
about protecting human involvement as a essential right for film workers. And I think that it came late. That fight needed to happen. It's been way too backburnered, and I'm glad it happened. But already in productions, we are seeing AI applications in real time with storyboarding and art visualization.
Yeah.
Like the days
yeah,
of graders are gone. Asking what we do on shows now, especially with real locations, is we take photographs, or in an exterior, we take a drone and we photograph it, and then AI maps it. And then we can say, create this shot with the character in the real environment. And it
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
does it, like Chris, like you said, like that. And
Yeah,
I've seen real time, and it frees up the creative process to be able to imagine things that might have taken 3 or 4 days before,
Or weeks or months.
when you would send an illustrator off to do some sketches, and then they had to go off and do them and bring them back. And it's like the speed with which people can explore ideas is going to open up. But there is always that teetering point of, well, when are the machines taking over? Going back to the
yeah.
Matrix and Terminator, and
Right.
when are they actually taking over the duties and making decisions? And will there become a point when the machines are saying, you know what, we have better ideas than these humans?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, right now you can write an okay script with an AI prompt in 5 minutes. You get something back. It's not going to be awesome. It's not going, but it's
It's a
my
start.
point is that that's what's it's capable of today. What's it going to be in 2 years? What's it going to be in 5 years?
Yeah, it's moving so fast that
Yeah,
a year is a huge I mean, the difference from us, where we entered high school with a Walkman and we graduated with a Discman. That it's moving so much faster than that. And that was fast. That was 4 years. We
Well,
went
this
from
yeah,
tape to laser technology.
real time with companies like Spotify, where what Spotify is doing is they are creating identities of AI performers that are from different countries, and they're asking the AI to write music within the genre of a popular artist.
Yeah.
So that what happens is that when Spotify ends up recommending music that's like Dua Lipa or Christina Aguilar or whoever, just put
Yeah.
in your favorite band or whomever, then those playlists comes up that have music that sounds like it's in the same vein, completely AI generated. Those get repeat plays, and those plays end up diluting the profits for real people artists
Right.
because
Wow.
Yeah.
it's
That's evil, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
happening right now in the music industry.
But that's
So
why regulations need to be put in, and that's why people who are on the front lines and in the industry need to be the ones playing with this stuff, putting those guidelines into place. I mean, we're in a place right now where they're just chopping regulations like crazy. So who knows where we're going to go?
so as you might imagine, if you follow the math through, the artists are created by Spotify employees with the AI engines. So the profits go right back to the mothership.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and there's no reason to split any of it.
No regulation
Yeah,
on any of this.
yeah.
So, I agree with you. I think regulation is the answer. Do I think that's ever going to happen? I'm not hopeful. No.
yeah,
Most musicians that are in the music industry today know that they're not going to make money off their music. They have to make other money in other ways. They have to do it by touring.
features.
They have
Yeah,
to do it merchandising. They have to do it with, you know, um, online branding. Hey, I'll give you a free T-shirt because you like my music, and but buy something off my website. It's all about the overall branding of an artist now, not the music. Where when we grew up, you had record album sales, which was the real profit, and the tours were to promote the records. It's
right.
completely inverted now.
Yeah, yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
Well, it was the same thing with VHS, with DVD sales. That was a whole market unto itself. And if your movie could make money in DVD sales, at least you had some claim that you could at least, you know what I mean? It was like it wasn't like it needed to be successful in the theaters if it was successful in the rental area.
Hence Blockbuster.
Yeah,
Hence, hence Blockbuster gone.
And
Hence
Netflix.
Hulu and Amazon and
Yeah.
those. That's the new VHS.
yeah.
And I think Netflix is the Betamax, which is about to get gone.
Yeah.
Just my opinion.
Well, they're trying to get into the games, and who knows? I mean, that's just a
Well, I think that the problem is there's a diminishing return going on right now where they keep upping the rates and removing the content.
well, that's
So
because the studios are starting their own streaming, saying we don't want to give that to
yeah,
Netflix. I mean,
yeah, that's true.
I was working on
Paramount.
Spartacus, which that happened just even with the little motion comic I did for Spartacus.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody wants to give money away. And then the top executives who have clawed their way into $50 million a year deals won't cut their rates. So it trickles down, right? Because they only have product that's made by people, but they don't want to pay the people more, but they could pay the people more. And I'm talking about film workers now, television workers, but they don't want to pay more because then they'd have to cut their own salaries because there's only so much money to go around.
Yeah.
But the studios, again, it's about personality and about how you run your business. But look, you scan Tom Cruise in a movie, and then you make an entire movie with the scanned Tom Cruise that you made. He should be getting a licensing fee, which is normal. That would be what you would expect. Every
Well,
time you
that
use
was
that
the other
model of Tom Cruise, you owe him some money.
that was
That's
the
a
other
real
part of
simple way
those.
to fix some of this stuff. But are they willing or are they too greedy? I feel like we're running in a world where it's just getting greedier and greedier.
That was the other part of those strikes that were going on in Hollywood was the physical likenesses of them.
Hmm.
Yeah, intellectual property is the totality of a person. It's not just their visage, it's also their voice.
Mhm.
It's the kind of charities they stand behind if they ever did. Like it's the totality of somebody. It's it's whether or not they wrote books because like Gene Hackman when he retired wrote westerns, after he stopped acting. So it's not just like any one thing. And I agree with you, it should be regulated, but you know, the world that I grew up in when we grew up
Yeah.
said if you work hard, you can become successful. And that's not true.
Right.
So that was presented to me as democracy. And we don't live in a democratic world. We live in a capitalistic world in North
Right.
America. And
Right.
that's a different motivator. It's not about what's right and wrong. It's what makes people money.
Yeah.
Well, and also it's manipulated sales. I mean, the truth of the matter is, everybody pitches it as a democracy, but it's really a capitalistic system that's covered by democracy. That's shelled with democracy. It's not really a full democratic system.
No, it's not. So in the end, if I've been a survivor in my career because I think I understand that in all three of my careers in the movie business and the television industry. But if you don't become a singular brand that has the value of some of the people that we've talked about, Coppola, Scorsese, where people come to you because they believe by you making something that they're going to make money, then you have to fit into the system in some way if you're going to survive.
Right. Right. For me, I feel like it's about evolution for me. It's always been, because the technology has always changed my industry so much. It's about, is it time to evolve to the next level? Everybody else is just doing the same thing. And I've always felt like what's kept me alive is doing that, jumping to the next thing and the next thing, playing with it, getting involved with whatever it is. I really feel like this AI thing is going to become sort of it really is less about a machine and more about the people that are using the machine. And it's really sort of exposing that. It's exposing people's greed and whatever, as opposed to sharing and connecting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. For now, but I think we're going to probably need to table that discussion for
Yeah.
another deal. We could go on for hours.
Hi, this is Andy Collin from Growing Up Aspen, and I'd like to thank you for listening into the chat with Chris Pomeroy and Adam Kane, talking about film, and wish you the best, and would like to encourage folks to attend local art house theaters. The small last theater in our hometown of Aspen is about to shut down, so we'd like to draw attention and hope that people keep these theaters alive. Also, the authors of Growing Up Aspen, Adventures of the Unsupervised. If you're interested, our book can be purchased at twistandturnpress.com or any local bookstore. Thanks.